They sat me at the end of the table, right by the kitchen door where the clatter of silverware drowned out the sound of my name. I hadn't heard it in hours anyway. Fallon raised her glass, eyes glinting with smugness, and said, "Well, at least she's here now scrubbing floors instead of files." Laughter scattered like glass on tile. I didn't speak. I just kept chewing silence while they toasted each other's promotions and praised my sister for a job I once covered for in secret. An operation she would fumbled if I hadn't stepped in. No one remembered that. No one asked where I'd been. My fork hit the plate. The crack in my wine glass caught the light just right, splitting my reflection in two. Then the door opened. A young man in a stiff black suit stepped in, eyes scanning the room until they locked on mine and widened. He froze. Then, loud enough to stop the music, he said, "Ma'am? Federal agent." The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say hi in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if this story moves something in you, consider subscribing. The golden lights blurred softly over everything, casting people in that pale waxen glow that made them look more like still portraits than family. Glasses clinked somewhere far off. Laughter swelled and receded like waves hitting a stone wall. One I happened to be seated beside. They'd put me near the back, just left of the kitchen door, where the cold air slipped in every time a server passed. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and that was the point. The hall was exactly as I remembered. The long mahogany table, the chandelier humming faintly overhead, the photographs on the far wall capturing years I used to be part of. I traced them from where I sat. Birthdays, graduations, beach trips. My face still appeared in a few, but dimmed with age and distance. Someone had moved the frame, where I used to sit in the center. Now, I barely made the edge. "Dana." Marilyn's voice floated over, brittle sweet. She leaned in, kissed the air beside my cheek, and pulled away before I could even exhale. "You're looking lean," she said, eyes flitting to the shoulder seams of my blazer, like they were checking labels. Gerald gave a small nod from across the room, as if the weather had walked in, and he felt obliged to acknowledge it. His tie was too tight. He tugged it, but said nothing. Fallon approached next, all glow and crisp perfume, holding a glass of Prosecco like it was an extension of her grace. "Can't believe you made it," she beamed, touching my arm just long enough to let her ring catch the light. "The prodigal nomad returns." Her husband Nolan chuckled, without warmth. "What's the occasion?" he asked. "Sabbatical from self-discovery over?" I gave a polite smile, the kind you learn to wear like armor. A server brought a glass of red to me, small crack near the rim. Nolan handed it over himself. "Didn't think you'd mind." "I don't," I said, even though I did. They asked vague questions. "Still in consulting? Finance?" I nodded. "I advise certain individuals." "Crisis counseling," Nolan added. "For yourself?" I started to answer, but Marilyn interrupted to tell a story about Fallon's networking firm landing a new tech client. Everyone laughed. I watched Fallon's hand rest briefly on Nolan's back. Too familiar. Too polished. I turned slightly toward the window. Beyond the glass, the lake was still, dark, waiting. Lila, Fallon's daughter, had run to hug me earlier, warm and real and soft against my coat. She'd snuck a cupcake and whispered like I was her secret. I clung to that moment now, a flicker of color in a room washed gray. I reached for the wine glass, turning it slowly in my fingers. The crack in the rim caught the chandelier's light, slicing my reflection in half. I didn't speak, didn't move, just sat at the edge of my own life, listening to laughter that had learned how to flow around me. The laughter came in soft bursts from across the room, always slightly delayed, like I was hearing it through glass. From where I sat, the lights didn't quite reach. My side of the table dulled in amber shadows, while theirs glowed gold and warm. The flicker of a candle at the centerpiece leaned gently toward Fallon, casting her in soft, celebratory light. No flame moved my way. On the far wall, the photo collage had grown. New frames lined up like a timeline of a life I wasn't part of. Weddings, holidays, career milestones, all familiar faces in unfamiliar pairings. I used to be in those frames. My place was now filled with tighter smiles and sharper suits. Someone had taken down the old 4th of July picture. The one I remembered Riley taking before the fireworks started. It had hung there for years. It was gone now. I'd brought a dessert, pure tart with rosemary crust, the one Marilyn used to request on her birthday. I found it later, still sealed in foil, set off to the side on the pantry shelf, next to a plastic grocery cake with Happy 65th piped in factory pink. No one asked who made it. Fallon's name was mentioned instead. She found the bakery. Isn't she thoughtful? At the table, Gerald raised a toast to everyone who's kept this family thriving. His eyes swept the group like a searchlight, pausing on Nolan, Fallon, even Charlotte. Fallon's assistant, now apparently part of the fold. They clinked glasses. Mine stayed untouched. Someone asked who had fixed Fallon's tech screw-up last year, Marilyn said. Oh, wasn't that Nolan? And Fallon nodded like she believed it. I waited, but no one corrected her. I had walked her through that crisis over an encrypted line, while sitting on a metal cot 4 time zones away. But here, that never happened. I reached for my wine, let the rim touch my lower lip, but didn't drink. My other hand brushed a ring of condensation left by someone else's glass. The napkin beneath it was slightly torn. Yeah, I smoothed it anyway. Twice. I tried to speak. Once when someone asked about crisis response work. And again when Lila mentioned an old story I used to tell her. Both times, the conversation curved away before my voice could find purchase. At one point, a guest I didn't recognize leaned in and asked Fallon, "Is she a friend from out of town?" She glanced at me, then back at him. Something like that. No one laughed. But no one corrected him either. The wind shifted outside, pushing a current of cold air through the doorway behind me. I watched the edge of the curtain lift, then fall again. A spoon clinked against porcelain, offbeat, like someone stirring tea alone. I adjusted my chair by an inch, just to feel the scrape on the floor, just to remind myself I was still here. Nolan stood where I remembered standing once, just to the left of the fireplace, under the sconce that made everyone's skin look softer, richer. The family had gathered loosely around him, their faces tilted toward his voice, toward the glass he raised. The story he told about Fallon's first client, and how they'd nearly lost the deal, but landed it in the final hour. The punchline landed, and the room cracked open with applause. Someone called him our rock, and the phrase echoed. Twice, 3 times, repeated as if to imprint it in the air. The light behind him flickered slightly, then steadied. It framed him perfectly, like the room had adjusted its own posture to accommodate him. My reflection shimmered faintly in the mirror behind the mantel, warped by the bevel of the glass, half hidden behind his silhouette. I looked translucent, thinner somehow, edges bleeding out. Fallon laughed and took Nolan's arm, proud and poised. Marilyn reached out to squeeze his shoulder as he stepped down. Even Gerald nodded, the way he did when something had his approval. I watched from a few feet back, standing beside a half-cleared sideboard. My hand brushed a folded napkin that had slipped from someone's plate. I didn't pick it up. Then, Fallon held up her glass again. "To Nolan," she said, voice bright and unhesitating. "For keeping us all together." More clinks. More smiling. Someone added, "You're the glue." And another, "We'd be lost without you." I remembered a different night. Different voices, saying words that sounded almost identical, but directed somewhere else. I tried to recall who had first used the word glue. It stuck in my chest like dust you couldn't cough out. I reached for my glass, fingertips closing around the stem. But I didn't lift it. The rim stayed inches from my mouth. Across the room, someone knocked over a spoon. It spun once on the hardwood, metallic and quiet. No one looked. For a moment, I almost spoke. My jaw shifted, but nothing followed. My throat had dried not from thirst, but from silence. I let the moment pass. Let them keep their story. In the reflection, Nolan's outline was solid, anchored. Mine flickered between the beveled panes, swallowed by his shadow. I stepped slightly sideways to catch a clearer glimpse of myself. The image sharpened, but it didn't return anything new. Just a woman watching through glass. Behind him, the wall cast two shadows. His tall and clear, mine fragmented by the edge of a cabinet. I stared at them, one stable, the other broken by design. Someone coughed. I thought it might have been me, but the sound vanished beneath another wave of clinking glasses. Someone mentioned the winter storm, the one that iced the hill and shorted the power before dinner. The memory brushed against me, like an old coat sleeve, familiar and out of place. I shifted slightly, glass in hand, and leaned just enough to catch Gerald's attention. "I remember that," I said. "You were still at work, and I got there first. The house was cold, so I lit every candle I could find. Lined them along the banister. Marilyn said it looked like a... Oh, that was when Nolan carried Lila down the drive in that ridiculous snow, right?" Fallon interrupted with a laugh, already turning toward Nolan. She had that tiny scarf she wouldn't take off. Marilyn chuckled. "He looked like a rescue team of one. And didn't spill the wine," Nolan added, lifting his glass. The table laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly. Just enough to make space for their version of the story. I didn't finish mine. My mouth stayed open half a second too long before I closed it again. The candlelight caught the side of my face as I sat back a fraction. No one noticed I'd stopped mid-sentence. I turned my wine glass a quarter turn. Not to drink, just to feel something under my fingers. The rim was warm now. A fingerprint bloomed on the base, faint and private. The conversation turned. Someone asked about the florist. Fallon smiled, said she picked lilies because they reminded Marilyn of her mother. I had chosen lilies every year since 2016, but that part had slipped. Or maybe it had been scrubbed clean. My other hand rested on the edge of the table, knuckles grazing a napkin that wasn't mine. I folded the corner of it, then unfolded it. There was no reason. I leaned slightly toward Gerald again, thinking maybe I'd say something, anything, to catch the thread again. But his head was angled toward Fallon. Her voice carried better. I sat back fully, let my shoulders touch the chair. A spoon fell across the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but the kind of sound that should have pulled a glance. No one looked. I glanced at the mirror above the bar. Nolan's reflection stood centered, backlit by soft white bulbs. Mine hovered beside his, distorted by the bevel of the glass, bent at the temple, ghosted at the edges. The card on the mantel still said, "To the ones who show up." Fallon's handwriting, still a little slanted. I remembered her practicing that cursive against my notebook margins. I reached toward my glass, then paused. My hand rested beside it instead. Words hovered, then folded into the space behind my ribs, where all the unfinished things seemed to land lately. And like that, the moment went quiet, not lost, just left behind. Nolan stood near the hearth, where the light always caught best. Someone had just finished toasting him again. Something about how he always came through, always kept things moving. The phrasing felt rehearsed, like a line borrowed from another room, another time. "He's the kind of guy you can count on," someone said. And a few heads nodded before the clinking of glasses answered in unison. I watched him tilt his head in that modest way he did, one hand in his pocket, the other loosely holding his drink. His laugh landed easy, like it had been practiced into charm. The chandelier above dimmed ever so slightly, sending a beam right toward where he stood. Around him, warm faces, full attention. I glanced at my own glass. The wine had gone warm, untouched since the last toast. I turned it slowly between two fingers. The stem felt slick from condensation. I didn't lift it. They were talking about last year's gala now, about how Fallon had stepped in, how Nolan had handled the logistics. Words like incredible, unshackable, just what we needed, floated easily, like steam from a just-opened dish. I remembered that event too, though not for the same reasons. My eyes flicked toward the mirror behind the bar. Nolan's reflection stood tall, central, clear. My own was softer, off to the side, blurred slightly where the glass curved. I moved an inch left, but the light didn't follow. I leaned back, arms folding gently in my lap. My breath caught once in the center of my chest. No one had said anything wrong. It wasn't false praise. It just wasn't for me. He was doing well. They were proud of him. And maybe that was enough. Maybe it had always been heading this way. But part of me tilted inward with a quiet question. Not angry. Not loud. Just there. Why him? Not in envy. In confusion. I'd held that same posture once, in that same space. Fielding questions. Steadying logistics. Keeping things together before they unraveled. Now, it was like watching a play where someone else wore my coat and delivered my lines, and everyone clapped louder than they ever had before. A photo was being passed around, Fallon and Nolan at a fundraiser. Everyone leaned in to look. Someone called them a power pair. The phrase landed lightly, without irony. I adjusted in my seat, shifted slightly to the right. The chair made a faint sound, but no one turned. I let my hands rest again. My name hadn't come up all night. Not as a note. Not as a memory. I looked down at the floor, beneath the table. The overhead light spilled just far enough to stop before reaching my shoes. Gerald raised his glass again. To Nolan, he said, for always showing up. The others lifted theirs without hesitation. I didn't. Instead, I watched the light tremble slightly along the hardwood, and wondered if it had ever been meant to reach me in the first place. The room kept blooming without me. From the sofa near the service corridor, I watched Nolan raise another glass-high arc of crystal, wash of light, swarm of laughter. The band slipped into a brighter tempo. Waiters drifted like small comets, and every face in that circle tilted toward him, as if warmth started there. My own reflection clung to a pane behind the dessert bar, blurred, almost fogged. Its outline swallowed by his sharper silhouette. Someone said, "To the man of the hour," and glasses rang. The compliment hung a moment, found no echo where I sat, then floated off with the music. My napkin lay folded on my knee. I smoothed its edge, lifted it, set it beside an untouched water goblet. The cloth kept a faint memory of heat from my hand. Nothing more. One breath later, I reached for the blazer draped on the chair back, thumb brushing the stitched lining where a pocket watch used to ride. No haste. I slid the chair closer to the table. Quiet click of wood meeting wood, aligning it perfectly with the others. Conversation eddied around the centerpiece roses. Nobody glanced my way. For half a beat I lingered, like a note held beyond its bar, waiting for the conductor who never lifts his head. I stood, a soft adjustment of sleeves, a sigh that never left my mouth. The floor lights narrowed toward the hallway, inviting no one. I moved through perfume trails and stray jokes, stepping between shadows of half-open coats. Nolan's laugh, loud, certain, followed me to the foyer but faded before touching my shoulders. At the threshold, I rested fingers on the doorframe. Polished oak, cool, indifferent. A waiter bustled past, tray aloft. He didn't miss a beat, didn't miss me. The hinge yielded without protest. Only a hush of air slipping outside. Corridor lights dimmed half a stop behind me, as if the switch lived in my absence. My shoes met the carpet with a hush of chalk on felt. I crossed the vestibule where an old photograph hung. Found us all at last year's gala, bodies tight, smiles practiced. My own face was turned slightly away in that picture too. Tonight the glass gave back only hallway emptiness. Another step, and even that echo disappeared. Inside, the quartet reached its refrain. Glasses chimed anew, voices braided over brass. The chair I had tended stood immaculate, napkin folded with fastidious care, stemware still half full, place card angled just so. Everything ready for someone to return, everything certain no one would. The spotlight roamed across the ceiling, searching stage right, found nothing, and settled on Nolan's table again while a single thread of music slid beneath the door and unraveled into the dark hallway where I kept walking. I stood in the dim hallway, fingers grazing the cool wainscot, while the dining room beyond unfolded like a replay from a life I no longer inhabited. Claire, fresh lipstick, flawless bun, apron that still carried the bakery flour scent I once wore, circulated among the cousins, straightening a knife here, fluffing hydrangeas there. Each move matched an old choreography of mine. Even the way she tucked her thumb under the dessert spoon was an echo. A spotlight followed her route, glinting off polished silver, marking her as the natural hostess. I watched the beam skip over my shoes and settle again on her shoulders. Applause rose when Aunt Marjorie lifted her glass. "To Claire," the aunt declared, "who rescued the peach cobbler tradition after all these years." The table broke into grateful hums. In the mirror behind the sideboard I caught both of us, she vivid, standing where the oval frame used to hold me. I a border blur. No one noticed my reflection slip out of focus, not even when Marjorie told the story of my first cobbler summer, replacing my name with Claire's. A polite laugh answered. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my wrist, as if memory were a pulse I could keep from bleeding out. Someone fetched the family camera. Chairs scraped. Bodies arranged themselves around Claire, center stage. I felt the ripple of chairs adjusting yet made no move. The photographer counted down. I eased one step back, then another, letting an uncle's shoulder fill the gap I left. When the flash burst, I was already outside its cone, a faint outline against wallpaper vines. From that shadowed angle I compared details like mismatched slides. Her lace cuff aligned with the same glass compote I once polished. Her laugh landing where mine used to lift. Her name rising in every toast, while mine slid soundlessly beneath the tablecloth. Once, I thought, that spot was shaped to my ribs, then let the thought drift unfinished. They queued for seconds. Claire offered napkins, poured cider, accepted compliments I could almost recite. I recognized the tilt of her chin when Mother whispered, "You understand this household," the identical phrase once pinned to me like a medal. The words floated across the candles. I felt them pass over but not through, the way light sails over water without wetting it. I shifted farther down the corridor until the music softened to muffled bass. Inside, their laughter looped without a missing beat. On a console table lay a frame. Last year's reunion photo. I traced the glass. There was my past self, bright at the center. A new shutter clicked in the dining room. The echo reached me like distant fireworks. I set the frame face down, not in anger, simply aligning present with truth, and moved toward the back stair, where no light waited, only the quiet frankness of an unclaimed space. I had slipped into the side corridor, the one paneled in dark oak where the sconces cast a syrup-colored haze over the floorboards. From there I could still hear the ballroom, a waltz circling the ceiling, glass against glass like faraway rainfall. My family's voices weaving stories that no longer required my surname. Their laughter rolled on without a hitch, the way a reel keeps spinning after the film burns out. A waiter, barely older than 19, passed, then paused as if rewinding a frame. He balanced a silver tray, but dipped his head to me first, adjusting the napkins so none overlap. "Ma'am?" he said, voice low enough to feel private. "I remember you prefer Earl Grey. Shall I bring one while it's still hot?" His words brushed a bruise I hadn't known was showing. Earlier, I had tightened a loose valve on the samovar for him. No one at the family table had noticed the splash on my wrist. Yet this stranger tucked the moment away like something worth keeping. I nodded, unable to gather the right syllables, and he moved off, shoes silent, leaving a thin ribbon of bergamot in the air. While I waited, a little girl, brown curls, patent shoes, wandered from the main room clutching a napkin creature. She halted when she saw me. "You the lady who folded the swans, right?" Mama said the wings looked real. The swan was mine, my old trademark at these gatherings, now performed by catering staff following instructions I had written years ago. One corner of the paper was creased wrong. I smoothed it, reshaped the neck, and set the bird back in her palms. Her eyes widened as though I'd returned something magical, not merely corrected a fold. She thanked me with a gravity adults rarely manage, then skipped away, calling for her mother to see how perfect it is now. A hush settled inside me, soft but insistent. The hush of somebody finally hearing your name, even when they do not speak it. In the ballroom, a cousin misattributed an anecdote, my anecdote, to the new woman at the center table, and applause followed. I should have felt the familiar sting, yet the sting was muted, blurred by the echo of the waiter's respectful "ma'am," by the child's reverent grip on a paper swan. The waiter returned, placing the tea on a small marble ledge beside me, not at chest height, but level with my seated silhouette, as if measuring the world from where I actually was, not where protocol claimed I belonged. "Thank you for earlier," he whispered. Then he vanished through the service door, the latch closing with a practiced sigh. Steam spiraled from the cup, slow and sure. Threading fingers around my senses, I wrapped both hands around the porcelain, letting the warmth climb into the hollows my family had overlooked. No spotlight shifted, no violin swelled, yet something minuscule realigned. A silent confirmation that worth could be observed by accidental witnesses, that value did not require the family ledger's endorsement. I raised the cup halfway, an undeclared toast to the corridor's quiet accomplices, then let the tea rest against my lips, tasting bergamot and the beginning of belief. I turned a corner no larger than a breath, and saw him, fluorescent spill from the buffet lamps, varnishing his profile, laughter from someone else tilting against his shoulder like a borrowed scarf. He held a flute by the stem, the way he once guided my wrist through a beginner waltz, yet the glass belonged now to another rhythm, a circle of faces I no longer recognized. The distance between us, a carpet's edge, a low arrangement of lilies, felt continental. Still, the first shock was how unchanged he looked, as though the hours I spent unraveling had never asked a minute of him. My pulse folded inward. He angled his body toward a brunette in sapphire, nodding while she recounted something comic. The nod, gentle, decisive, clicked open an old frame, the conference foyer where he dipped his chin exactly so, informing two silent partners that my proposal could be removed without discussion. I tasted that elevator air again, stale with aftershave and apology withheld. The memory sliced quick, no sound, disappearing before it finished bleeding. He laughed then, quiet, practiced, just enough for the brunette to lift her glass in triumph. The note of that laugh brushed another reel loose. A balcony evening, his shoulder against mine. The same laugh softening my doubt before evaporating into night. I watched its new owner receive it, unaware she was inheriting a recycled currency. Someone passed between us carrying plates. When the gap cleared, his gaze skated over the crowd, skimming my outline without docking. I felt the glance pass through me like light through glass left in an attic, acknowledging shape, not substance. My fingers curled, then relaxed. The linen napkin I had been twisting drifted from my grip and landed where ballroom shadows pooled. A small surrender he would never notice. A violin brushed a high phrase. He lifted his hand, beckoned the brunette toward the dance floor, with that palm-up invitation I used to read as home. I stepped back, granting the moment its stage. No resentment rose, only the chill recognition that I was viewing a scene already in post-production. My lines, long since muted, in the sound mix. I repositioned myself along a mirrored column. In the glass, his new duet floated crisp, center-lit. My reflection hovered, faded at the margin, edges feathered by incidental glare. I watched until my outline seemed less a person than a smudge Cruz forgot to polish. Then I turned slow, deliberate, allowing the mirror to keep only those still necessary to the composition. As I moved, no chair scraped, no name called. Air parted with the courtesy owed to anyone anonymous, and closed neatly behind me. At the threshold, a gilded frame displayed the evening's seating chart. His name glimmered beside the brunette's in precise calligraphy. Mine nowhere. I pressed 2 fingertips to the glass, not to reclaim space, only to confirm its cool indifference, then let them fall. The corridor beyond held quieter light, carpet absorbing every footfall. My breath synchronized with the hush, and the weight I carried settled into a manageable absence. No forgiveness, no fury, only the clean knowledge that some corridors are one way. I kept walking, until the music thinned to a rumor. Until even the rumor understood it was time to stop following. I crossed the threshold like someone trespassing her own signature. The dining room, my old compass, spread before me, unchanged in geometry yet strangely wider, as if the walls had inhaled once I left. The head chair, mahogany arms polished by years of my sleeves, now cradled Grace Ann. She belonged to a later chapter. Distant cousin, bright smile, still new enough to consider the house impressive. A downlight pooled over her hair, turning it theatrical gold while the rest of the room lay in softer dusk. She tapped her glass with the same silver fork I once chose for symmetry, rose, and guided the staff through a timing cue I had invented. Applause rippled, light, convinced. Someone complimented her sense of order. Another noted how naturally she managed the place settings. No name preceded the tradition. My palm rested on the back of a side chair, one I used to straighten before every meal. Feeling the faint groove my ring had carved long ago, but the wood no longer answered. I let my hand fall, air slipping between fingers, like undone ribbon. A framed photograph hung near the mantel. In it, Grace Ann posed with the family, beneath last winter's wreath, occupying the center I once filled. The caption in gilt cursive read, "Our heart of the table." I looked for even a shadow of my initials in the matting, found only blank linen. Laughter swelled near the buffet, where she demonstrated the garnish twist I had taught in a quieter decade. "Brilliant," an uncle declared, as though the flourish had arrived fully formed tonight. I watched the lemon peel spiral, remembered the citrus scent on my hands, tasted the quiet subtraction of memory. No one searched the doorway for me. No space widened to include a missing chair. Conversations braided around her competence, sealed without seam. My surname floated once, ear directed toward a baby in the next room. A heritage story I apparently no longer headlined. I adjusted the knot of my scarf, though it wasn't crooked, stepped back until the chandelier's halo dropped from my shoulders. From here the tableau framed itself. Her at the axis, relatives angled toward her voice, silver catching light like obedient stars. I stood in a dimmer wash, an unexposed half of film. A server brushed past, murmured, "Excuse me, ma'am," and placed a single dessert at the far corner. My corner, once. But the plate bore a tent card scripted E4GA. The flourish of ink crossed the porcelain where my monogram had lived. I nodded to the server, though he hadn't asked anything, and watched the steam curl upward before drifting away unseen. When Grace Ann raised her glass for the toast, sleeves pushed neatly to her wrists the way I used to do, I felt something inside me fold like linen returning to the drawer. I inclined my head, not assent, not surrender, merely acknowledgement of accurate replacement, then turned. My shoes made no sound on the carpet. Even gravity seemed finished with my outline. At the hall mirror, a sliver of reflection followed, her profile bright and certain, my own reduced to peripheral haze. I did not correct the focus. The corridor ahead offered quieter walls, and the name attached to that silence, for the first time, felt entirely mine. Applause shivered through the ballroom as the MC lifted his card, voice slipping into the soft authority reserved for history. Tonight, we honor the architect of the Caldwell revival, the one who redesigned tradition into tomorrow. Grace Ann Caldwell. My spine rose a fraction. Condensed hope, reflexive. Then settled when the name floated clear. He continued. Each line a breadcrumb from my own past year. Late-night mock-ups spread across this very parquet floor. Menu cards balanced between reheated coffees. The silent decision to press a lemon peel into a perfect curl. I heard my fingerprints recited back to me, syllable by syllable, wearing someone else's monogram. Spotlight bloomed over the head table where she stood, cheeks petal bright under the glare. She smiled the way good porcelain catches light, nodding as though she recognized every anecdote, though we had never met before last week. Around her the family clapped, palms firm, knowing, and I watched the motion of their hands instead of their faces. It was easier to measure loss in sound waves than in expressions. Across the aisle, Michael's wife froze, mid-clap. Dada. Charlotte had seen the drafts pinned along my Seattle studio walls. Had once said the ink still smelled like devotion. Now her eyes widened, darted toward me. Apology softening the blue. The gap shrank to a single heartbeat before she looked away, palms resuming their rhythm with the crowd. The MC's cadence lingered on the smallest detail. A lemon ribbon twisted. Just so. A seating chart designed, like breathing. Every note struck true, rang foreign. I felt each word enter, carve, echo. In that echo, a hush formed. Private. Internal. Like the second after a glass slips. But before it shatters. No one corrected the record. Why would they? The story fit the new frame. The band struck a triumph chord, champagne stems lifted. Someone shouted, "Speech!" And Grace Ann pressed a hand to her chest, perfectly humble beneath the crown of borrowed accomplishments. I adjusted the napkin on my lap, crease aligning with the seam of my dress, then slid the untouched flute to the far edge of the linen. The glass chimed once against the plate, the sound drowned beneath the ovation. My pulse slowed to meet that silence. Charlotte found me one last time, lips parted around an explanation she would not give. I answered with the smallest smile I possessed, permission or farewell. Even I couldn't decide. Her shoulders fell. She turned back to the stage. Spotlight lingered on Grace Ann. I rested my fingertips on the table's varnish, feeling nothing of the warmth I had sanded into that wood months ago. Breath left me in a thread, almost invisible, like steam from tea gone lukewarm. When it vanished, I gathered my clutch, brushed an imaginary crumb from the hem, and exhaled again, longer this time, emptier, while history applauded a name that was never mine. I pushed the side door open and slipped onto the terrace. No one noticed. The hinge sighed, then stilled. A late spring breeze pressed the dress against my knees, cool, unscented, almost kind. I crossed to the railing. Marble, recently polished, held a trace of warmth from the ballroom lights. I set 2 fingers there, felt blood drum once, and let go. Behind me the band changed keys. Applause burst like distant fireworks, dulled by glass and distance. Their celebration rose, folded back on itself, went on without a seam. Through the tall panes I watched the party continue. Grace Ann tipped her flute in modest protest, while another toast praised her tireless vision. Gold confetti clung to her shoulder, the spot where, a year ago, my pencil had rested, as I adjusted the first mock-up. Around her, faces turned bright, synchronized, certain. Nothing in the arrangement suggested vacancy. The story ran smooth. The editor was gone, the page rewritten. I searched for a gap where my outline might have belonged. Found only reflections, silver trays, lifted wrists, chandeliers multiplying in the glass. I was the faint shadow on their surface, visible when you knew to look, gone when you looked through. A gust slid along the terrace, lifted a strand of hair across my cheek, left it there. I didn't move. Inside, laughter fluttered against the windows, lost volume on contact, became a harmless tremor in the glass. Even the spotlight's spill stopped short of the threshold, Out here, the light was thinner, the air easier. My lungs drew a slow arc. In, yowl. Salt of distant ocean. Out. Less weight than before. Another breath. Deeper. The kind I used to take when a blank canvas was pinned and waiting. I rested my palm flat on the rail. Felt the stone cool now, the earlier warmth gone. Then let the hand drift to my side. No tremor. No tightness. Just the quiet click of recognition. The version of me that needed their spotlight was still in there somewhere, but smaller, already loosening its grip. Inside, a waiter raised a fresh tray. Glasses chimed, names lifted. None of them were mine. The realization settled without sting. It was simply weather. A front had passed. The sky had changed color. Nothing personal about the wind moving on. One more breath. Longer. Die? The exhale left as a ribbon of condensation, vanished before reaching the balustrade. I turned my face toward the dark garden, toward the city lights beyond the hedge, and let the murmur behind the glass recede to a single harmless note. No anger, no petition. Only the steady hum of blood and night, and room enough, at last, to hear it. I was still on the terrace when a shape slid between curtains and dusk. Canvas messenger bag, scuffed Oxfords. One of the caterers at first glance. Until he straightened, and the porch light found the tiny enamel pin at his lapel. A folded paper boat, teal and white. Evening, he said, voice careful not to ripple the quiet I'd built. He set 2 empty glasses on the balustrade, wiped condensation from his palm, then nodded toward the ballroom. They're running low on stemware. Same hitch we hit at Harborfest, remember? You sketched a rack design on a napkin. Saved us a small disaster. Harborfest. 3 summers back. I had drawn laughing gulls along the margin. Joked that the ocean owed me patent royalties. No one here used that story. It sat where I left it, with the crew who loaded kegs at dawn and packed trash at midnight. He didn't ask if I remembered. He just let the name hover, soft as linen. Then, because trays were waiting, he gathered the glasses. Before turning, he added, almost to himself, still the sharpest compass I know, Cap. Figure the tidal swing. The old call sign, short for Captain Curve, barely louder than the breeze. The door closed behind him. I stayed motionless, but the air inside my chest shifted, as if someone had cracked a window long painted shut. Harborfest. Salt, drying on bent elbows, pencils tucked in hair. The first banner lifting clean above the pier because I'd insisted on an extra grommet. Nobody applauded then. Nobody miscredited. It had simply worked, and that was thanks enough. A single gull, maybe drawn from memory, floated across the dark of the garden, wingtip flashing in the floodlight. I followed its arc with my gaze, steady now. Behind the glass wall, the gala rolled forward, smooth, sealed. Names valeed. Corks released small clouds of praise. I watched them land where they were aimed, and noticed, without heat, how none of them reached this far. My fingers, resting on the cool rail, curled. First curiosity, then intent. Skin met marble, grip held, no tremor. Somewhere a door latch clicked, metal on wood, but did not call me back. The wind changed direction, tugged my skirt forward, as if marking a line. I inhaled, nothing fancy, just a full breath taken on my own timing, then released it slow. The exhale carried no echo of glass breaking, no hunger for applause. Only a taste of sea I hadn't noticed earlier. Inside, spotlights ricocheted off crystal and chandeliers. Out here, a thinner light slid along the paper boat pin, still drifting in my mind, catching edges I'd forgotten were sharp. I did not smile. The muscles stayed loose, alert. But in the pane before me, my reflection tipped its chin a fraction higher, eyes pulling focus. The outline gained weight, stone lifting clear of river silt, water sheeting away. Under my hand, marble warmed again, this time from my own pulse. A waiter, hurrying between tables, brushed my shoulder. The tray tilted. A single linen napkin fluttered free. And something harder slid across the parquet, catching the light with an unfamiliar gleam. He stooped, meant to pocket the stray object, then paused, brow creasing. "Ma'am?" "You drop." He glanced at the disc, at me, at the stage where the program dragged on. The pause lingered, one breath too long. He set the tray down, lifted the piece with both hands, offered it flat on his palm as if it might burn. A polished bronze coin, edges scalloped like tiny gear teeth. Front, an enamel paper boat, teal and white. Back, 3 embossed coordinates, and a date no civilian calendar marks. I had not carried that coin in years. It had been locked in a drawer since the harbor deployment. Yet, there it was, impossible to forge, impossible to misunderstand. The waiter's mouth shaped a silent "oh." His eyes flicked to my face, widened, then dropped. He tucked the coin inside the napkin and placed the bundle beside my plate, with a reverence usually saved for relics. No question, no explanation, just that small, deliberate gesture. Forks froze midair around me. A pair of executives who had chuckled earlier now stared, recognition grinding through their calculations. The senior partner at the next table set his champagne down with an audible click. Even the MC on stage faltered, one syllable hanging unfinished while the band coasted on without him. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The coin had done the talking. I remained still, fingertips resting on the linen. My pulse steadied before theirs did. Across the room, Amanda turned halfway, searching for the source of the sudden hush. Her smile wavered, confused, then cautious. When she traced the ripples back to me, spotlights hadn't moved, yet the room's geometry shifted. Angles pivoted, so that the edge of every gaze now settled here. Not hostile, not friendly, merely alert, as a crowd recalibrates around new gravity. I breathed once, shallow, and let the breath go. Did not hide the coin. Did not lift it either. Voices resumed in muted keys. Careful. The way one speaks near glass you're no longer sure is tempered. Laughter returned. Thinner, spaced by glances. No one resumed the earlier jokes. The air had thickened with second thoughts. I slid the napkin a fraction closer, enough to feel the metal's weight through cloth. The waiter retrieved his tray and slipped away. Shoulders squared now, as if entrusted with a secret worth guarding. Amanda raised her glass toward me. Some half-made toast, or perhaps a question. I met her eyes, unblinking. She looked away first. I stayed seated, spine easy, breathing slow. The coin lay still, but its orbit already rewrote the room's map. Circle pulled tighter here, loosened elsewhere. I touched the rim of my water glass. No tremor. Then set my hand flat on the table, palm warm, certain. For the first time all evening I did nothing at all, and the silence belonged to me. I laid the napkin on the rim of my plate, the fold straight as a ruled edge. No one stopped me. The waiter retreated half a step, tray shielded to his chest. A chair beside mine slid back, opening a hush wide enough to walk through. Talk around me missed a beat, then continued at a lower register that spared the air I occupied. I smoothed the line of my jacket, slow, unhurried. The young director across the table let his wineglass touch the cloth as if it were porcelain. He looked down. 2 assistants who had giggled about my dress earlier bent over dimmed phones. The chandeliers still glowed. The quartet still played, yet everyone dialed their lives to a softer volume. "Ma'am?" The voice was small, carefully polite. The floor coordinator who, an hour ago, had announced my married name over polite applause. Now the title sounded different. Lighter, truer. I tipped my head. No apology, no explanation. He understood. He stepped aside, offering a path as though opening an emergency exit for someone who suddenly remembered where she belonged. Hardwood reflected each step. Steady heels, not too high. striking a private metronome. Behind me, chairs paused midway. Silverware settled with unexpected gentleness. People afraid to drop something larger than cutlery. Near the doors, Amanda leaned against a pillar, glass clenched. The smile she wore so easily had leaked away. Words gathered on her tongue, then dissolved. I answered the silence with a slight nod, and kept on. In that fraction of a glance, we both recognized the balance resetting itself. No force required. At the threshold, a draft lifted the drapes. On the marble console, I set a brass token, a subway coin polished by years in the dark of my purse. I did not hide it, did not press a point. I simply left it to catch the overhead light. Proof had no anger left. It chose its own seat in plain view. One long breath. Shoulders lowered. The door slid. The noise fell behind like water shutting off. I walked into the smaller hallway glow, among the scent of old wood and night air. No one followed. Somewhere back inside, a glass met a tabletop with a neat hollow click. Last note of a party that had just learned some truths arrive without fanfare. Honor, I had discovered, did not need reclaiming. It knew the way home the moment I stood still long enough for it to find me.